Hi, and welcome to this episode of Bariatric, the podcast. If you're watching this on video, you can tell I am not in my usual beautiful office. I'm actually in Las Vegas, not somewhere I like very much. However, I have a new happy reason to come to Las Vegas, and that is to work with my friend Tabitha Johnson, otherwise known as Barry Boss. And we spent the last 2 days recording a lot of videos for the Barry Aftercare program. Tabitha is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and together we do a segment called Family, Friends, and Relationship Issues because in your Barry Aftercare life, so many things change, right? And so we want you to involve your family, your friends, and those that you have relationships with in your healthy lifestyle following surgery. So we spent many hours recording 6 videos. So those will be coming up as part of the complete Barry Aftercare program, where you can sign up is www.bariaftercare.com. Today, we're following up with the series on communication styles. The last 2 episodes were about assertive communication. That is what we're going for here, my friends. We want to be assertive. Get the connotations out of your mind that assertive means confrontational or loud or nasty or difficult. I know a lot of people will avoid conflict at all costs, right? I'm going to avoid conflict at all costs persons. That's that's fine because assertive communication is not conflictual. It is having the kahunas to say, this is what I think, this is how I feel. This is what I would like in my life. That is not confrontational, nasty, loud, ugly, mean, disrespectful. It's a very healthy way to communicate, and that is what we're aiming for. And as adults, we want to teach any young people in our lives that that is a healthy way to communicate. Tonight, I'm going to demonstrate an unfortunate form of communication, unfortunate in the sense that it destroys relationships. It destroys relationships with pretty much anybody in your life that you use this form of communication with, and it destroys a part of your self-esteem, your self-worth. How do I know? Because this was me. This is how I was raised. This is what I learned. This is a way that I protected myself. And it's also a way I almost ruined my marriage. I did that in several ways, but fortunately, both of myself and my husband were willing to get ourselves into therapy and learn much healthier communication skills and lots of other skills too. So, as a person who's had weight loss surgery, you're emerging from that process in a stage of life where you are growing as an individual, as a human being. And what you will find in this personal growth and development stage is that you're going to have more confidence. You're going to take more risks to do things that maybe you haven't been able to do for a long time, or things you've wanted to do for a long time and just never tried before. Communication is a huge factor in your bariatric lifestyle as you make these changes. You want to be the best you in all areas of your life, and communication can result in bringing you closer to people, or it can result in moving you further away from people. And after your surgery, and as you're making changes in your life, you want to make your relationships healthier in that process as well. Learning to communicate in a healthy way is not something most of us were taught. So we either communicate in a particular way out of protection. We don't want to be hurt. We were taught that children are to be seen and not heard, and we still feel that way on the inside. Or we're fearful that we will become like an adult in our life who was scary and angry. Or maybe we just were kind of shut down anytime you were trying to express yourself. Regardless of what your background is, as a person who is working to become the healthiest version of themselves and wants to avoid emotional eating, I'll tell you why that was brought into this conversation in just a second. You want to learn healthy communication styles. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, we are not taught these things outrightly, like son, daughter, or at school. There are 4 types of communication. We're not usually taught that. And if we were, it's kind of a blip on the screen of the billions of things we learned. as an adult, this is one of the tools that will be the most effective in your life to get you where you want to be in work, in relationships, in avoiding emotional eating. And why is that? Because if we communicate in an unhealthy way, or if we allow others to communicate with us in an unhealthy way, especially an aggressive manner, like I'm going to talk about tonight, we don't feel good about ourselves. Or if we're the person on the receiving end of aggressive communication, it can be very upsetting. It can be very emotionally damaging, devastating, because it can be abusive if it's continued, if it's a pattern of communication, as opposed to twice a year, your person speaks aggressively. But if it's an ongoing behavior pattern, then it's a form of abuse. It's verbal abuse. So if you're on the receiving end of that, and if part of the verbal abuse is name calling or shaming or those kinds of things, which many of us are familiar, if your go-to for comfort was food, you may go to food for comfort because it's your familiar territory. So we want to learn to be assertive in our communication and assertive in not allowing others to speak to us in aggressive manners. That will prevent us from engaging in emotional eating. And emotional eating is going to result in regain. So this is directly and indirectly related to your bariatric surgery, but it is absolutely critical to your development as a healthier person. So let's get on with it. We're going to talk about what is aggressive communication. And I just kind of gave away the answer to this one, but how is it that aggressive communication, whether you're the aggressor or on the receiving end of aggressive communication, how can that lead to emotional eating? Well, I just gave you that one, but and what causes a person to become an aggressive communicator? And then if you are an aggressive communicator, how do you kind of tweak that to become more of an assertive communicator? So whatever style of communication that you have learned and that you typically engage in, you want to tweak that so that you become an assertive communicator. So just to kind of foreshadow, you may have heard these before, but the four main kind of communication styles, and we don't necessarily just have one, but we tend toward one or two primarily. There's assertive, which we're all going for. That's the goal. There's aggressive, which I'm going to talk about tonight. There's passive communication, and there's passive aggressive communication. Those latter three are not what we want to hold on to. If that's what we've learned and if that's what we practice in our communication, we want to learn how to tweak to become assertive communicators. So let's get on with that. So in general, assertive communication is most likely to lead to disaster more than any other kind of communication, I would say. I don't know that that's a fact, but aggressive communication is what a lot of people are afraid of. Aggressive communicators, if aggression is your MO on a daily basis, it can be a form of bullying. It can be a form of abuse if it's a consistent, ongoing form of communication. So aggression can be frightening, right? I was talking to Tabitha this morning and I was telling her that she comes from a background of very passive communication. I come from a background as a child growing up with very aggressive communication. For example, on Sunday mornings after church, all the neighborhood adults will get together in our kitchen and have coffee and have discussions about two things people really should not discuss, right? Religion and politics. Now, they thought this was great fun. They thought they were having these great, wonderful debates. The kids, we were terrified because these great, wonderful debates about their varying political thoughts, their religious thoughts, all of the things were violent, not physically, but verbally violent. I'm talking, there was yelling, there was shouting over people, there were fists being stamped on the table. That's where I learned my very, very colorful language, by listening to all these adults. I'm telling you, I heard the Lord's name taken in vain more times on Sunday than at any other time of the week, because they had some big time arguments, and, fists and shaking fingers and standing up and, glowering over people. And it was terrifying. Now, they were actually angry, but they did it every Sunday. Okay, not every Sunday, but too many. And not on Sundays. My parents' form of communication with one another was often very aggressive. They spoke tersely to one another, they spoke angrily to one another, they were unkind. And so I grew up in an atmosphere of aggressive communication. There were also 6 children. In order to be heard, we were all loud. I wasn't aware, as most people aren't, as they grow up and leave the nest and go out into the world, that they carry what they learned with them, usually. I carried that with me. And after my husband and I had been married a short time, one day he said to me, "Why do you have to say things like that?" And I just was like, "What do you mean? Why do I have to say them like what?" So I responded in, to me, what was my normal tone of voice, my normal theatrics. And that was probably the first time I had ever had anybody comment on my aggressive communication. It wasn't the last, I assure you. So since that time, all through my adult life, this is something that I have had to work on very diligently. When we would go to couples therapy, it was like, girl, you need to tone it down about 12 notches. And if we're talking on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is like, woo, I thought I was speaking at like a level 3. Other people were hearing me at a 9, and I didn't understand it. When 10 people tell you you have a tail, you might want to turn around and take a look. I was getting this message from our therapists, from people at, work, in my jobs, at school. It's like, whoa, girl, bring it down a little bit. I was not aware. It's just what I knew, and it's how I communicated. Over the years, I have learned to tweak my aggressive communication style into a more assertive style. Now, my assertive style is still a couple notches more intense than most people's. But from where I came from, it is way notched down. That's why I have the fair but firm. That's why people are like, you're so confident. Well, I just use my voice in the way that I was taught to. It hasn't always reflected internal self-confidence. It does more so as I've gotten older and I've done a lot of work and I've been in therapy and been a therapist. But aggressive communication is not a healthy tool in a relationship. And here's what happened over the years as I learned to recognize how my aggressive communication affected other people. It hurt me. It hurt me to see how I hurt people I loved. And it hurt me to be that person. So those two things combined helped me, plus the education I got about it and the feedback from therapists and practicing and all that. It helped me to learn that, first of all, I don't need to protect myself. Part of the aggression, well, we'll get to that in a minute. I'll say this, but part of the aggression came from wanting to protect myself from being hurt, which I'll explain to you in a minute. But aggressive communication is confrontational. So when people think assertive and they have this idea of confrontation, that's incorrect. Assertive is calm, respectful, kind. Aggressive communication is the confrontational one. So it's not necessarily good to be confrontational. There may be a few times and places in life when it's okay, but as a way of life, as a way of communication, it's not the healthiest. It's unfriendly. It's unkind. It's disrespectful. It's discounting of another person. Oftentimes you're talking over them. You're not listening at all. You're just making sure you're getting your point across. You're disregarding people. You're disregarding what they think, how they feel. You're discounting what they just don't really matter. Not that they don't really matter, but in that heightened emotional state, that's your MO. But nonetheless, it is disrespectful and it is going to hurt relationships because an aggressive communicator is all about their own agenda. So I want to be heard. I want you to hear me. I want you to listen to my point. I want you to understand where I'm coming from, but I'm not giving you the same respect to hear your point of view. Assertive communication, I'm going to share with you how I feel and I'm going to listen to how you feel. And I'm going to let you know that I heard it. So aggressive communication really is a way of manipulation. It's I'm going to back you down. I'm going to intimidate you. I'm going to scare you into keeping your mouth shut. That way you're not going to confront me. You're not going to point out my bad behavior. You're not going to disagree with me. I'm not going to give you the time or the space to hurt me. So I have an agenda. I'm going to back you down, right? It can be bullying. And a lot of times there's an intention to control or dominate. Now, I didn't have that conscious intention, but there was some of that. I'm going to control and I'm going to dominate so that I'm in charge and you don't get to be heard and you don't get to disagree with me and you don't get to, you know, total bullying, totally insecure on my part, right? Um, it can be coercive. It can be, I'm going to poke at you until you just give up and give in to what I'm saying and go along. So unhealthy, so unhealthy. And it just so happened that I married my counterpart. He was not aggressive and he would just shut up, go along with whatever I said, led to him disrespecting me disrespecting him. So damaging to our relationship and our marriage. Because what I was doing in my aggression, I'm going to get my way. I'm going to get my way. Ugh, so ugly. So there are nonverbal and verbal signs of aggressive communication. And this one was something that I engaged in for forever earlier in our marriage. Eye rolling, like, oh, come on. I mean, such a nonverbal, like, you don't know what you're talking about sort of thing. So disrespectful. Pointing fingers, right? Ugh. Pounding the tables, huffing and puffing, standing too close or looming over other people, having the mean face. I have an uncle, or I had an uncle, he's passed, my dad's brother. And he was a scary, scary man for us children. And as I became an adult, I was much less intimidated by him, but he did not try to lessen his intimidation toward me. I remember it was after my father had passed, and he's an attorney, so he was in charge of the estate. And I said something to him, not in an adversarial way, but I was asking a question that he did not like. And he literally, we're all sitting on the couch, he literally came over, stood in front of me, shook his finger at me, and said, "Don't be insolent with me, Constance." Now, I laugh at this point because I was I was an adult then, and it's like, listen, pal, I'm an adult and you're an adult. I will be respectful, but back off, right? So I was no longer intimidated by him. But that kind of behavior can be extraordinarily intimidating, especially if your self-esteem is at a low, or if you're feeling insecure, or if that brought back memories from childhood and you have a little PTSD going on with that. So those are some nonverbals. Some verbal ones are the loud, intimidating voices. Hello, that was so me. Here was me too, interrupting, talking over. My husband and I both did this for a very long time. It was like we were not listening to one another at all. And so in couples therapy, we learned a lot of good techniques for listening to one another. Not fun, but critical to a relationship. So we were not acknowledging what the other one was saying. We were not acknowledging their ideas. And I heard something the other day on a podcast. I got to start writing this stuff down. It was something about until you are willing to look at the other person's behavior through their lens, you will never begin to work toward accepting and understanding them. And that was a huge thing in our relationship because my husband and I are so vastly different in how we think and how we communicate. And when I was taught to think, if I'm Steve and I think like Steve, which I can never really do, but I kind of, after 40 years, have a little better understanding. And I look at things from how he would, I can sort of have a little more understanding and compassion about where he comes from. And to me, it's like, how do you think like that? Right? Because I just can't. Same with him. He does not get how I think or where I come from. So it's very hard for us. But when we make an effort to try to, this is where I was coming from. Can you understand? Well, not really. But knowing you, I can understand that that's where you came from, right? It's helped so much. And here's the thing. I don't understand why people don't go to therapy and couples therapy because just because you had parents doesn't mean you know how to be a parent. Just because you've seen people in relationships doesn't mean you know how to have a relationship. Just because we hear people talk all day long doesn't mean we know how to communicate well. Please, people, if you want to get your life to a happier, more content, peaceful place, get some therapy or do some reading about communication and practice it. And here's another good thing. Like maybe one party is willing to go to therapy, the other one refuses. I have seen almost miraculous changes in relationships where just one party changes their part in the dance. And if they're consistent with this positive change, it's amazing how the other person often comes around. Not always, but sometimes. But aggressive communication, criticizing, insulting, scoffing, scoffing and rolling your eyes, blaming, sometimes ultimatums, right? Discounting other people's ideas or thoughts. Like, what is the matter with you? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Why can't you just understand, right? Being sarcastic, personal attacks, um, such as, you wouldn't get this no matter how many times I explain it or how many ways I try. You just don't get it. You just couldn't ever, right? How insulting. Or what is the matter with you? How many times do I have to tell you? This started because of your incompetence. Those kinds of comments, so cutting, so mean, so unkind. Don't you dare walk out on me, talk back to me, whatever it is, right? You better, whatever. Ugh, that was me. And it's very embarrassing. And I have a lot of shame about that. I have a lot of gratitude that I took the initiative to get the help that I needed. And so much gratitude that my husband and I were both willing to work on these things. And I'm telling you, this was a years long process. It was incremental. But my new favorite phrase, practice makes progress, right? Practice makes progress. And so little by little, as we would practice these tools we were learning, we would make progress. 40 years later, 90% of the time, we can have a conversation without the old habits coming in. I would say 95% of the time, yeah, there are times when we regress, right? Just like with your food over the years, there are going to be times when you emotionally eat or you know, eat more than you wanted to or something that wasn't planned for the day, whatever. It's not about perfection. Practice makes progress. We're going for progress, and we've made a lot of progress. That's one of the things that I like about my stage in life is that I can say to people, listen, I've been there. I have had to do the dirty work. I've had to do the hard work. But I can look back now and see that all that practice did lead to so much progress. Not perfection, but definite progress. Here's another thing about aggressive people. They don't say they're sorry. They don't acknowledge their wrongdoing. Let me tell you, that is one of the greatest gifts I have ever given myself, is the willingness to go to people and say, I really did you wrong. I really messed that up. I am so accountable for starting that argument. I am so sorry, right? What a freedom. What a freedom for me not to be rigid and holding all that anger and animosity and ugliness. I don't think I ever heard either one of my parents my entire life apologize for anything. I am serious about that. And that's not how I wanted to be. And another characteristic of aggressive communicators is they hold grudges. This is true. My parents were divorced for probably, oh my gosh, so I was like 20, let's say, and my mother died when I was like in my 50s. So for over 30 years, that woman, to almost the day she died, complained about my dad, held so many grudges. It's like, what a sad way to live. I just wouldn't want to live that way. So, aggression, right? Get mad easily. That was me. And often about little things. Oh my God. I feel so sad when I think back. And I feel sad for my husband because I got mad about so many stupid little things. And other people are often intimidated by people who use aggressive communication. And that's kind of the point of it. Do keep in mind that one aggressive act is not abuse. The way I used it, it was abusive, primarily toward my husband. And in my family, sibling against sibling, right? Really sad, really sad. All of us have come a long way in learning to tone it down and go from aggression to being assertive. What a gift for us and everybody who's in our lives. So, we talked about the reasons that aggressive communication can lead to emotional eating. Again, if you're the receiver of aggression, it can be intimidating, scary, leave you hurting, make you question yourself, make you doubt yourself, play on your insecurities. And if your MO has been to get comfort from food and you're still in a situation where you're being aggressed upon, you may tend to go back to that food. We need to have healthy coping skills for dealing with life, and life is going to include people who are aggressive towards you. Now, if this is somebody in your immediate family, then you need to learn to set boundaries, such as, if you're going to talk to me that way, I am going to get up and walk out. I'll be back. So you're not threatening to, strike abandonment fear in that person, but I'm not going to sit and listen to this. I did this with my daughters when they were in high school. You know how high school kids can be a little mouthy and whatever. So I remember one day talking to my daughter and she was mad about something and I'm willing to talk to you about this, but if you're going to continue to be snarky and snotty with me, then I'm going to hang up and we can talk about it later. Okay, I'm going to tell you I'm going to hang up now. I'll call you back later and we'll try again. If you do that with people who are aggressive towards you, it teaches them, I'm not putting up with this, right? Now, if it's a dangerous or threatening or physically violent situation, you need to talk to somebody about that, how to handle that safely. But if it's somebody who's verbally aggressive, but it's not physically violent or dangerous, then you set those boundaries, but you got to follow through, right? Even if it's a family member on the phone and they're talking nasty to you, listen, I'm willing to talk about this issue, but not if you're going to yell at me, not if you're going to call me names, not if you're going to be cursing at me. If you do, I'm going to hang up and I will call you back in an hour and we can try again, or tomorrow, or whatever. But then you got to be willing to follow through with that. But that is how you deal with somebody who's being aggressive toward you. Now, if you're the aggressor, and if you're learning that that is not who I want to be or how I want to be, and you engage in that kind of behavior, I know that I felt horrible about myself. I was ashamed. I was sad. I was upset. I hurt my person. I felt hurt. I had abandoned myself basically because that's not who I wanted to be. That can also, I bit myself in my mouth today and I keep doing that when I talk. Sorry. Um, that can also lead to big emotions, and I may want to comfort myself with food. So I have to have a protection plan. When I feel like I want to emotionally, what are some things I could do instead? Call a friend, go for a walk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to have things in place so that you don't go to emotional eating in any situation. So that's a way that aggressive communication can lead to emotional eating. And we all know what emotional eating leads to: weight regain. So, some negative things that can come from aggressive communication. We've talked about it pushes people away, it damages relationships. It just does, which can lead to loneliness on the part of both parties, isolation. It can lead to a pity party. Oh, they just don't understand me. What did I do that was so bad? A, you're denying what you did. It can lead to a victim mentality. It can lead to anger, bitterness, resentment. That's not good on either side of that. If you're on the receiving end of aggression, you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time. That's not good. That's going to lead to intense, higher levels of anxiety, which may make you want to turn to food, right? Or, if everybody's intimidated by you and you have any kind of conscience, you're going to feel remorseful, even if you're not willing to admit it yet or acknowledge it or apologize. When you've done something that goes against your values. Now, if there's a personality disorder like narcissistic personality disorder, or if there's like I can't think of the word right now, people don't sociopath, you don't really feel remorse, or that's a whole different thing. They're not going to feel remorse. They're not going to get it. And it's going to be hard for them to get through. But if you're somebody like me who learned an unhealthy skill and then took that and ran with it, but it's not who I wanted to be, there's a lot of hope for change. So there you go. So you lose self-respect and other people lose respect for you, for sure. It destroys trust in relationships. Yeah. So one of the things that I read when I was reading about this recently was that the one time aggressive communication can come in handy and be a good thing is in an emergency situation. So if you've got somebody saying, this needs to be done and it needs to be done now, you go do that, you go do that, right? But it's not abusive. It's like somebody's taking charge. And a lot of people are in like, don't know what to do mode, and somebody's telling what to do. Just thought I'd throw that in there. So what causes people to become an aggressive communicator? Well, as I told you about my family dynamics growing up, I learned it, right? So that's one of the ways, learning it. Now, like the disease of obesity, this is interesting. There's not a single explanation to explain the reason that somebody might be an aggressive communicator or a passive person, because there are some genetic things, right? It could be a habit combined with genetics. It could be a habit combined with genetics combined with temperament. Temperament is, about the characteristics you're born with, partly genetic, partly just your personality. Other people who are pretty much usually calm people can show aggression if they're in a high stress situation. So high stress can lead to aggression. If somebody feels powerless. So if you're in a situation where you kind of feel backed into a corner, you may come out like, ah, it's kind of a protective sort of thing. Or if a person experienced aggression or abuse through communication earlier in life, then they probably learned that sort of thing. So, and what I'm about to say is probably not going to surprise you at all, but think about the idea that how a person behaves, I've said this in a lot of scenarios, is often a giveaway about how they're feeling on the inside. So if I'm aggressive, what does that tell you about how I probably feel on the inside? Well, I mean, it's just not one thing, but if I'm aggressive, it could tell you I'm really angry and bitter and I'm holding a grudge, right? Or I'm carrying a lot of sadness and this is how I express it, right? Because anger can often be a cover for sadness because for some people, anger is more comfortable, believe it or not. It's often a feeling of inadequacy. Like I didn't feel in my life like I had much, believe it or not, as loud as my voice was, I didn't feel like I had a voice that was heard, right? So it was like the more aggressive I could be, maybe I had a chance of being heard. But a lot of it inadequacy. And that was definitely the case for me, right? Also, it can be an indication that a person hasn't learned how to manage their emotions, emotional regulation, right? I did not know how to manage or regulate my emotions. If they were big, they came out big. My therapist said to me one time, there's no in between with you, Connie. No in between. All right. So aggressive communicators may also have this underlying fear, a lot of fear. That was also true for me. I had tremendous amounts of fear. And if I become aggressive, then it's not going to give the other person a chance to belittle me. So when I saw my parents like constantly attacking each other, you know, if I'm more aggressive, then you're not going to get a chance to be aggressive and call me names and tell me terrible things about myself. Not good, not good. Um, but if I'm aggressive, a lot of times it's because you were made to feel like your opinions didn't matter, um, like they don't have value, or that their opinions were not heard, nor did they matter. So as you get older, then this can lead to believe that aggressive communication is the only way to be heard. Still, it's not healthy. It's not good. It's not an excuse. But when it comes to your attention, like it was brought to my attention first by my husband, then in therapy, then I have to make a choice. It's like, I guess this is a thing that I wasn't aware of. So I'm going to have to change it. And I'm the one that's going to have to do the work. Now, I talked a minute ago about like people who are narcissistic or sociopathic. They may feel like they're superior, and that's really what they believe. And there's not a lot of getting through there. They might think they're smarter than other people, and they think they're entitled, and they think that these other lesser people don't matter. And so they treat them as such. And it's not a good thing, right? So it could be part of like borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. And they're probably not going to catch on, even in therapy, like, this is causing a wedge. Because a personality disorder is a very deep disturbance, and it's become like a way of life, and there's not a lot of insight. But for most people, you can get through to them, right? So again, there's a biological component, protective component. Um, there can be a manipulative component as well. And aggressive communication is oftentimes part of a mental health concern, part of a bigger picture. So if you have a lot of anxiety or maybe post-traumatic stress or significant depression, um, a lot of times these things can lead to hostile or aggressive behaviors because people might feel backed into a corner. They don't know what to do with all of these emotions that they're experiencing, regardless of what the reasons. I will say this again, it's like the disease of obesity. Regardless of the reasons, And we know that obesity is a very complicated disease with numerous factors that result in carrying excess weight. Regardless of the factors that led to where you're at, you've got to take responsibility to make the changes that are within your control. Some of them are not. Your genetics are not, right? Your environment is. Your choices at the grocery store is your responsibility. Those are our take responsibility for the things that you do have control over or influence over. Same with aggressive communication. I have to take responsibility in every communication with another person to be mindful of how I speak, how I come across, just like we all have to be mindful and take responsibility for the food choices that we make. So, how do I take this aggressive communication style and tweak it so that I can be assertive? I want to say how I think. I want to say how I feel. I want to say what I would like in this situation. So go from aggressor to assertive person, I need to be willing to listen. First of all, to how I'm coming across to the person I'm talking to. It's like, you need to lower your voice because this is intimidating to me. Okay, I'm willing to do that. I need you to stop interrupting me. I had to learn to stop interrupting. I had to learn to listen. One of the great ways that we do in therapy, and that my husband and I had to do, is when he said what he was thinking, I'd have to say, "This is what I heard you say. Do I have it correct?" And vice versa. It's kind of a pain in the rear, but it's a great way to learn that skill of active listening, to make sure I heard what you were saying. And then to not react with anger, but to say, when you say this, da, 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 or when you did this, I felt this way. So I take my emotions, I learn to manage them. I do deep breathing. I take a time out when I need to. If I feel like I'm going to yell, I say, I just need a minute. Let me just process this, right? Taking care of myself and being considerate of how I'm going to affect you. So we have to be aware of what our triggers are, things that anger us, and we got to be aware of what our body is telling us, like, is my jaw clenched or my fist clenched? Do I have tightness in my stomach? Am I having a hard time breathing? Those are signs. And when people take anger management classes, that's what they do. They become aware of what is their physiology telling them. And then they have to calm themselves down before they respond. So some ways to increase your self-awareness related to communication are: be mindful of your tone of voice and give your partner or whoever you're talking to permission to say, maybe it's just a hand signal, like, drop it down a little bit. Be mindful of the words that are coming out of your mouth. Am I saying cuss words? I don't want to do that when I'm having a conversation with somebody about something serious, right? How's my posture? Am I leaning forward, or am I giving the evil eye? Am I rolling my eyes? Be mindful. And if you and your partner are working on this together, give them permission to say, you know what, I see you leaning forward, and I would just appreciate if you would just sit back, right? And you can do the same for your partner too, right? So if you feel yourself starting to ramp up, then you're responsible, right? You're responsible to notch it down. And when the anger or the aggression becomes the focus of the communication, the thing you're working on is completely lost, right? And then you have distance from your person. I want to have a relationship where we come together. When I become aggressive, you're going to turn away from me. And I, in my anger and aggression and my grudge holding, am going to turn away from you. If I say, you know what, I really handled that poorly. I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. Now I'm coming towards you. And if I say those kind words, you're more willing to come to me. And if I behave in an assertive way in my communication, you're likely to come even closer to me. And if we both do that, we're going to end up where we want to be, which is closer to each other. Not like this and run into food for comfort. So that's kind of that, right? So here's some realities, some things to think about. We don't need to be right. I thought I needed to be right, to be validated, to feel like I had worth, to feel like I had value. I saw my parents fight to the death, not literally, but verbally it seemed like it, because they, by God, were going to be right. Don't have to be right. Other people don't have to agree with me. Other people don't have to agree with you. It's okay for you to think one way and me to think a different way. It's okay for you to believe one thing and me to believe another, and we can still respect each other. I don't need to use unhealthy communication to bully them into giving in to me. If everybody in communication uses I statements instead of you statements, right? So an aggressive person is, you're doing this and you're doing that and you really pissed me off and that's going to lead to bye-bye, right? This has been one of the greatest things that has brought my husband and I together. When one of us is willing to start the conversation with, this is what I did, and I see that this is how it affected you. What an invitation to listen and be part of that conversation, right? As opposed to, you did this and you did that. I really blew it. I overreacted when you said whatever. I I barked at you when you mentioned such and such, and I am really sorry. You did not deserve that. That's an invitation to come closer. That's an invitation to let you know that I value you and you are important to me and you don't deserve this kind of communication. All right, so we want to focus on the topic being discussed using I statements. I think this. I feel this way. I would appreciate this. So assertive communication is just saying what I think, what I feel, what I want, right? It's it's about me. How are you going to argue with how I think or how I feel? It's just who I am. Same with you. And then we have to listen and say, what I hear is you think this. What I hear is you feel this way. What can we do to come closer, given that we're both thinking different things? How can I respect what you need? And how can you respect what I need? Right? And kind of lighten up, right? We make our lives so much more complicated than they need to be. Try to inject some humor if it's appropriate, or just tell yourself, don't take it so seriously. Lighten up, Francis. It's from a movie. And then get help if you need to, because again, remember, we aren't taught these things. And effective communication is a very difficult thing to learn. And it takes years and years and years of intentional practice to learn really good, healthy communication. But it's a relationship saver. It's an self-esteem booster. When I can respectfully have a conversation and feel good about how I've interacted, being assertive, not backing down from what I think or how I feel, but also being respectful, it's a good feeling. And when we feel better about ourselves, we don't need to emotionally eat. When we set boundaries and don't allow other people to treat us poorly, we feel good about ourselves. It increases our self-esteem and our self-confidence and our self-efficacy and all the good self stuff. And then we don't need to turn to food for comfort. It's a beautiful thing. All right, so take home messages. If you recognize that you or somebody that you love is consistently aggressive with their communication, get help or suggest that they do. And if they're not willing to, you do it anyway. You do it anyway. And learn how to set boundaries so that you're not we teach people how to treat us. We allow other people what to get away with. But again, if there's physical violence, that's a different situation, but you definitely need to get help to learn how to deal with that safely. You learn the assertiveness skills, and you use assertiveness skills in your communication. And it's amazing how people sometimes come around. Aggressive relationship will definitely damage your relationship with others and with yourself, and it can absolutely lead to emotional eating and regain because your self-esteem is damaged, your self-confidence, your belief that you can change this kind of thing gets eroded, and it's going to push people away from you. So if you're the aggressive communicator, unless your goals are to push people away from you, keep it up. But if you want to get closer to your people, learn assertive communication skills. And stress eating is using food to cope with unpleasant emotions and stressful situations. Being an aggressive communicator is stressful. Being in a relationship with an aggressive communicator is stressful. Not good, not healthy, not happy either way. So get help and get happier. Invitations for you, also known as a call to action. This is not a bariatric specific topic. If you would like to encourage other people to listen to this series of podcasts about communication styles, please invite people to do so, right? And if you'd leave me comments, I would really appreciate it because I'd like to give you a shout out, first of all, to thank you for listening to the podcast. And just to, I'm not going to share your story. I'm not going to share your name, but just give me comments about if what you hear is helping you in your life, in your bariatric care life, in your relationships. And please follow the podcast so you won't miss any of the episodes. So next time, we're going to talk about examples of aggressive communication, and we're going to show how, if you're an aggressive communicator, you can tweak that and make what you're saying an assertive statement, which is a much more win-win as opposed to the lose-lose that comes out of aggressive communication. And as always, we are talking about your health. It's your responsibility this day and every day. Thank you sincerely for taking your time to spend time with me on this podcast. I hope that something you heard will inspire you to be a better version of yourself and maybe go give somebody you love a big hug. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.